because you're not here.
Oh,
Just
stop.
throw me off.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. What were you?
Yeah, I was gonna text. I said, let me give him an hour, and you came just within an hour. I already had the text ready.
You had it cooked up?
It was just 2 lines.
Don't come. All right, ready? Ready?
Yes.
1, 2, 3. Hello, welcome to 6 Train Therapy. I'm DJ Mayday.
I'm Professor S, your psychotherapist to the stars, wearing a hoodie.
That's right, and also keeper of the Mind Stone. So today we're gonna be talking about childhood trauma and how it shows up in adults. So on that note, we're gonna frame the topic and allow Professor S to take the reins on that one.
I thought you were gonna read it.
I just asked you to define it.
So trauma is a psychological response to a very distressing and disturbing event.
I think also too, like the whole childhood trauma is, we kind of grow up with it, right? Like and then it changes, it kind of morphs and it warps, and then you can't easily spot it anymore as an adult. If you
kind of cover it over in different ways.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you even erase it from your memory. That happens quite a bit, but people can't even remember it happened, or it's foggy. They don't know. They know something happened, but they don't know the series of events.
Like a dream state or something.
Like a dream state. I've worked with somebody that actually happened, and after about 2, close to 3 years, we were able to he was able to see the whole thing in his head. But we were together for 3 years.
It took 3 years to
just to start picking it up. Yeah, because the first thing he would say is like, it didn't happen. And he would even say to me, just tell me, Stephen, that it didn't happen. And I would say, well, look, you've been talking about this for a while, and you're adding more and more information over the years, and so it becomes hard to manage.
I mean, like my own personal life, like I always find myself like, there are markers in like, why did I do that? Or why am I behaving that way? Or why did I respond that way? And then, in this kind of stuff, this work that we do, I get by proxy, information, and I know that there was probably a reason for me responding that way or behaving that way or saying that thing. And a lot of times I find myself like going back. This is how my father would have responded, or you know what I mean, or whatever the case. This is why I responded this way because of something that happened in my childhood, and so it kind of manifests in my relationship. And I'm like, oh man, that's crazy, and it's kind of been like revelations for me as I go along. Like I'm like, oh man, I know why I did that.
I think in my experience that I'm willing to share so many.
Right. It's tough, right? Like it's tough to like, you don't want to throw your personal like garbage out there.
But the one I feel real comfortable talking about is coming to this is me using my immigrant experience. I can be not American when I want to be, and then I can be Caribbean kind of sort of when I want to be.
Oh, don't forget British.
Well, and this is the trauma. So coming from England to America at the age of 15 was actually quite traumatic because it was a culture shock, it was a language shock, it was so much was different. And one of the biggest differences, this part of the trauma, was recognized that being black in this country was so negative. I didn't know, I was too young in England, I guess, to really understand it deeply. I had the beginnings of it, but when I came to this country, then it really big time. I think that was difficult for me to recognize that people would look at me and associate me with negative things.
Would you say there were so few, and correct me if I'm wrong, so few like people of color in England at that time that maybe it was
sheltered?
You were.
No, it was sheltered. It was more sheltered than being small. I know what you're saying, that there wasn't many black people in England, but you have to remember where I lived, there were black people.
Right.
I was like an urban. It's like being in New York, an urban center, but so it looks like there's a lot of black and brown people in the world. But then when you travel out of the bubble of New York, you see cornfields and cows and a lot of white people.
Right.
So, but that's the majority. But if you're living in the 5 boroughs like we are, if you don't leave your borough,
You think
you feel like you're in a brown town.
Brown town? I like that, Brown
Okay.
town.
So that was a very difficult thing, and then the way people spoke, and they were loud. And when I was in high school, they were just like screaming at the teachers. I mean, they were like wild. Some about wilding. They were wilding when I was in school. It was just, I couldn't believe it. And I came from a school culture where you call the male teachers sir, and you call the female teachers madame. Madame, yes.
Oh, you
Madame
fancy.
et monsieur.
You are fancy.
Yeah. So anyway, that was part of the.
Well, my trauma is not as, you know.
Even the fashion. I didn't know how to dress fashionably, put all your colors together. I know about all of that. There was a lot of trauma in my day anyway. That was back in the old days. You know, even the.
I can imagine, because that was like the 80s, right? Or 70s?
The 70s. I'm much older.
Sorry, the 70s. So I mean, at that time.
I think wheels were round at that point. I think they,
But I'm just,
I think they
no, I
figured
don't mean,
out-
I'm not making fun of you, so stop.
No, but,
stop.
but really, seriously.
I'm saying it's
wheels
just that,
became
that,
round.
like the 70s and the 80s was a time of like great like
Upheaval.
fashion change, and like people wearing long collars, shiny shirts, and then, you know, so I'm just
And you also had
imagining.
white flight. A lot of the white ethnics were leaving the Bronx or going to different parts of the Bronx. So the 5 boroughs, a lot of whites were leaving. So it created another dimension of change too.
Like a vacuum
Yes.
for you black Brits to come in.
So the Black Brits came in and all these other ethnic groups.
Well, so my trauma is a little different. A lot of it has to do with my father and my relationship with him, and just one thing that I'm willing to talk about is like, I felt like my father was involved in our lives, me and my brothers, up until we were about 10. You know, it felt like it was.
He was there. There was a presence.
He was present and he was involved. There
Yeah.
was, and then it felt like after that there was like this bizarre disconnect. So, you know, now that I have kids, you know, like there's no, like I was always able to, when he was young, when our kids were younger, I was able to go, oh, that's how my father would do it. I'm not gonna do it like that. I'm gonna do it, you know, I'm gonna find another way. But because there was nothing after I was 10, like it felt like there was nothing, you know.
Like meaning that what?
Like he didn't participate anymore.
So
like
he was
even
just-
on
he
the
was home.
weekends, he would go off. This is weird. He would go off and play tennis.
Oh, okay.
And crack at him, you know,
Crack
early in the
morning.
morning, and then not come back till late at night. So I wouldn't even see him. And then he would work all week, so I wouldn't even see him. There's like we barely talked. This was all the way up until I was like 18.
Right. Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
barely talked. So there's no roadmap, good or bad, for me.
being a father.
Yeah, for me to kind of call on. So like, even if it was bad, I would be like, okay, I won't do that. You know what I mean? But there's nothing. There's no reference for me. You know what I mean?
Wow, steep. Yeah.
So that took me a while to realize. Like, why am I not responding to my older teenage kid? And it was like,
You just didn't know.
because I don't have anything to base it on.
Right.
Personally.
Right.
So those were things that I've recently noticed.
Yeah.
So-
and I think for me, that the separation of my parents also around, we said 10, 11? 10?
Yeah.
So mine was at 11. So how can I say? I mean, the roadmap that I had was then, because my father didn't come, the roadmap I had was if I was to have a child, I would be very involved in their lives, where my dad kind of wasn't, and at a certain point. So maybe we had the same father. What do you think?
It's possible. Well, at least half of it.
So yes, I was very involved as a father and as a parent. So
Right, but that's what I mean.
Essentially,
Like
yeah.
you said consciously, I'm gonna go against
yeah, I made a
everything.
decision.
Right.
Yes, from
But-
an early childhood experience. Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know why. And even years later, I impromptu kind of mentioned it to him. You know that, like, what happened?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know, like,
And what did he
why'd you,
say?
like, just, he was like, well, then he left, you know, abruptly while I was away.
Right.
You know, that's a whole other thing.
Right.
But later on, years later, maybe 10, 15 years later, I asked him, like,
Yeah.
what was, he was like, you were grown.
Oh, okay.
You guys were grown already.
He didn't feel he.
And I was like, wow, wait, what? We
Yeah,
weren't grown. I was
yeah,
like 11,
yeah.
12 years old.
Yeah,
Like, what?
yeah.
So the mentality was just, I don't know. It was different. And that was, to me, I was like, oh, it felt rejecting. I'm 12 years old, 10 years old, whatever it was. I can't remember exactly. But I was rejected by this man.
He had no clue.
He had no clue.
And yeah.
No clue.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, that was it.
No, I just think that there's so many types of trauma that can occur and how we would respond to it. So I'm not sure if you want to
show the video.
Yeah, show the video.
Yeah, this is a cool video because it kind of talks about,
kind of sets the tone.
The tone of, like,
talk about this.
9 signs you're still suffering from unhealed traumas from your childhood. So that's basically what this is about. So we're gonna run it and play it and then talk about it.
Signs you're still suffering from unhealed trauma. 1. You resist positive change. You have a hard time accepting positive change and may even try to resist it at first. You feel like you don't deserve to be happy. 2. You need to plan for everything. Your need for control is most likely rooted in a traumatic experience that left you feeling helpless and vulnerable. 3. You have a strong fear of failure. It might be instilled in you by unresolved trauma that causes you to have a negative belief in yourself and internalize your shortcomings. 4. You have a strong fear of success. You're afraid of losing what you'll have even before you achieve it. 5. You have difficulty concentrating. If you've been having gaps in your memory, blacking out often, and finding it hard to keep your train of thought, it might be your mind crying out to you for help, asking you to work through your trauma. 9 signs.
So
I think that's a great example of how it shows up as an adult. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's just the interesting thing. Like, you know, you're not even thinking about your parent anymore. You're at work.
Right.
You're talking to your boss, and you're scared to tell him something or her something because you might get rejected.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And then you're like, well, why would they reject me? Like, where's all that coming
from? Yeah.
And then you start peeling it back, and you're realizing you have this built-up trauma of rejection.
Yeah. And I know for me, I think part of it was also like perfection. Like I never could quite, you know, like if I was to write something, it was like, I remember being in supervision as a therapist and a social worker. As you're in supervision, you talk about your cases and you talk about your notes and stuff. And I had my supervisor look at my notes. He says, "Where'd you get all this information from?" It was like where you would write maybe like 4 lines, like I had 20. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, how did you find this out? I said, I just asked the person. So all this stuff, but it wasn't really needed. But in my mind, that's what I felt I needed.
You felt
somehow,
insecure?
Yeah, somehow insecure. And I was like the youngest on the staff, and all these other things came into play too.
This was a long time ago, I'm assuming.
Well, that's when the wheels became round. I told you this. He's not listening. I'm like, come on now.
So
you know what they had back then? Planes.
Ooh,
Airplanes?
Airplanes?
They had airplanes.
They have them now too.
Well, they're better now.
Yeah.
Back then, all the passengers had to like flap it. We all had to work together. There was no racial issues, no gender issues. We all had to flap our arms.
Like the Flintstones?
Like the Flintstones. Okay, so I digress.
Yeah, so,
can
we were talking about, go for it.
Can I just say, so you know also, because a lot of what I'm going to say is very kind of general trauma things, but some of the things, like if you experience like beatings as a child, or even when a parent, you know, left, things like that, it can give you flashbacks. Like you actually like remembering, oh my God, like, you know, like if you ever, like let's say my son, and I'm like, shit, I gotta get to his, you know, to the show he's doing. I gotta do this because it's like, if I don't do it, like, because there were periods when my dad wasn't there. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like a flashback, like I don't know where I am, but some of the more advanced negative responses to trauma is you actually have an intrusive thought. You could be just cooking and all of a sudden you remember, you know, let's say mom leaving the house with all her bags getting away from your dad, and you're like, what's going on? And that could just happen like even as an adult, like you said, with your supervisor, with your boss.
Yeah,
you're, and it can trigger some of that already.
You're preparing for those same feelings you had when you were young.
Right.
And it also happens with a lot of children who are sexually abused.
Oh, yeah,
So it impacts
All of
their adult relationships on a different level.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
One of the ways too it can show up is like you can be very avoidant of relationships. You know, anything that's related to just one small area, or anything related to a relationship can cause one to just avoid that situation, just so that you don't experience what you
or just unconsciously, because based on the trauma, you're actually really on an unconscious level maybe, but you're seeking out partners that are just as abusive or just as, you know,
you're almost recreating the same thing.
yeah, so you don't even realize that you're if it was a parent or someone who was yelling at you, screaming at you as a child, you're looking for that person, to that same kind of person that's screaming or yelling at you, or someone, or maybe even if if it was sexual abuse, now you're looking for something that maybe is out of the norm, you know, sexually,
especially when
to satisfy that.
Yeah, especially if you experience sexual abuse as a young person. Sometimes that can cause you to be overly sexually aroused, you know what I mean? Because it's your first experience with sex, you're being introduced to something that your mind is really not ready to comprehend, and it can play out in wanting to have more sex or just avoiding intimacy altogether. It can show up in very different ways, but that's one of the ways. And also...
and children are sponges, right?
Yeah, and you know what I just thought of? Oprah talks about that. She talked about when she was sexually molested as a child and how promiscuous she became. And she had a baby, and that, you know, she was the first person I ever heard speaking on, a famous person talking about it so openly, on how that process appeared in her life, and then she had professionals actually talking about the psychology behind that, and how we use it to survive in many ways.
I mean, like, the thing about children, they are sponges. Like, I raised two, and I know that at any point I could, you know, this is I'm speaking in hyperbole, but I could put an M16 in her hand, train her, and send her out at 6 years old to kill people. Like, they are sponges, absorbing all this stuff intensely, like creating...
They're being programmed in a way.
Creating neuronic pathways in their brains to be this person, you know, that we are building at a young age. So,
and you know what's interesting though, because as a parent, we don't know if we're traumatizing our kids.
Oh, that is the trippiest shit.
Or what, you don't know what they're gonna remember, that you say, well, you know, you might say when they get older, well, why didn't you tell me? I had no idea. Like, that kind of an experience.
Yeah, you're always gonna screw up your kids. You may not screw them up the way your parents did, but you're gonna screw them up in a whole new way. You know what I mean? And I feel like,
powerful.
You know, we talked about it in a couple of episodes ago about cell phones, and social media, and I definitely feel like, especially with my oldest, she got a cell phone way too early. You know what I mean? And I'm like, that was my big thing. That was the thing that I screwed up in, that I didn't see, coming.
How it could affect.
Yeah, and adjust for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then kids having like access to porn and violent things. I think. Oh, I know another thing that would trigger some of my, like, I avoid seeing it or listening to it, is the news. I minimize I limit it might be about 10 minutes, maybe a day or every other day, I'm listening to the news. Because it's so negative. It feels like the world is coming to an end, or there's going to be a race war, some craziness in my head, you know what I mean?
Or an atomic war.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's just like, it's nightmarish. You always say that too. I truly feel like the news is traumatizing you.
Oh, absolutely. And it's designed, but it's designed to make you hungry for more. Like, it's also very it's excitable.
Right.
You know?
Right. It's like a car crash. You can't
exactly.
You can't pull your eyes off it. You want to.
And then they keep reminding you there's a car crash, and they'll show you different parts of the car crash, from the back, the front, the top.
And then they create panels about the car
that's
crash.
what I'm saying.
It's crazy. It's madness.
It is madness. So,
but in doing the research, and I wanted to also kind of talk a little bit about, you know, the recent discoveries about how trauma also could be passed on biologically to offspring.
Yeah, go ahead.
This absolutely blew my mind, and I just feel like, you know, a lot of the science is still being done, but there is, trauma in the genes, right? So, I don't want to reread it, but basically they did did research. Should I read it?
Yeah.
Okay. You gonna make one?
We'll edit it out. If you sound like a nutcase.
Intergenerational trauma can stem from biology, learned behavior, and even the collective experience of a group. Some research suggests that trauma can affect a person's DNA and potentially influence the health of future generations far removed from the traumatic event. Researchers have investigated whether Holocaust survivors and their children showed changes to what are known as epigenetic markers, chemical tags that attach to DNA and can switch genes on or off, which in turn can influence inherited traits or diseases. So there was also, I'm part of this research too, they also did a test on mice, and this research was done, I think 30 years ago during the 80s, where they made mice fearful of the smell of cherries, right? So they basically made this group of mice fearful of cherries, and then those mice had offspring and also responded to the cherry smell with fear, even though they weren't conditioned to have that fear. But they responded in the same way. So that's epic, I feel like, in telling, right? So I'm brown, black, we have like terrible histories due to colonizations. Like what impact, what crazy pathways that have we created in our brains to deal with that level of trauma? So that's a whole other can of worms.
It's like a whole other subject matter, but it's true. And actually, I heard of this experiment and so on, and I think the Holocaust survivors and how certain things get passed on to their children is probably one of the most researched groups on generational trauma.
They didn't mention slavery, but they didn't mention slavery in the study.
But because the study, because they're looking at certain genetic markers. But the thing is
but it might be because they were able to. It was a containable, like they were able to measure it.
You can extrapolate from this to other things. But I know one of the things that when I went to Yeshiva University, which is a Jewish educational system that I did my master's in, that when we had a brief conversation about this, that the anxiety that some Jewish people feel comes from their parents being anxious about certain things, whether it's your finances or how you're going to do in your life, and how you're going to get married. So all these things that's going to keep you stable and protected, and they can end up passing on that anxiety to the children, to the next generation. And they show that it was they actually did happen. But I just want to mention two kind of other things, right? Like, so historical trauma, which is what you basically was touching on, but also like with the Native Americans, right? The indigenous people, how they were taken away from their family, the children specifically were taken away from their families and kind of whitened them or to make them less savage. And then when they eventually came back to their families, the parents, actually the parents, or they were the kids of the parents? I think both. So what you get in the indigenous population here is high levels of substance use and mental health issues.
I understand what you're saying, because when you don't have a way to deal with trauma.
And if you don't have anyone to pass on your history and your culture, you lose something. Then you lose your sense of identity, and that's what has happened with colonialization, with, let's say, the indigenous here, the Aborigine in Australia, and then with the Atlantic slave trade coming here. So where you come from has been completely removed, and basically there's been a mind, I was going to say a mind F, but there's going to be a mind, there's a mind shuffling or a mind fuck. A mind fuck has been done, so you don't know the roots that you come from that are quite strong. And so that leads to having identity issues, which leads to also negative ways of coping.
Yeah, I think
I hope that makes sense, or the way I said it.
Yeah, it totally did.
Yeah, but does it make
I'm
sense to them?
gonna edit that part where you made the statement.
Right.
You know, outside of that, it's all good.
Yeah.
But also, you know, it's when you like you said, when you're missing something, but you don't even know what it is.
Right.
In the case of the Native Americans or African
Yes.
slaves, or you don't even know,
Right.
but you know something's missing. Again, trauma, and probably if trauma is passed on, biologically through DNA, I'm assuming everything else is too. So making that assumption, like something missing from who you are and what you are, it's got to be traumatic and impactful. And then I can totally imagine where, like for the Native Americans and other cultures, like substance abuse would be a great way to escape, right?
And I think one of the things I remembered from this training I had to do on on the indigenous and indigenous peoples and substance use was that you had a whole generation who are now parents and grandparents now. They were the ones that were taken away from their tribes, and sent to these boarding schools where they had to live, and basically they whitenized them. So when they had children, they wouldn't talk about what had happened. It was so traumatic, they would not pass it on to the children because they don't want to re-traumatize
Right. You don't want to
them,
scare
but then
kids.
they get disconnected from their culture because their parents wouldn't pass on,
Well, then I guess it worked.
and it worked. Absolutely. Yep.
So
Yes.
like that's a level of trauma that's like mind blowing. Like
Yeah, it affects
people
as
say
an
that
adult.
the angry black man or the angry black woman, or they'll say shit like that, and some people are like, hey, why don't you smile more, or like what do we call them, microaggressions?
Yeah, microaggressions.
You know what I mean? And they don't understand that they have no feeling or sensation of that kind of upbringing and that level of trauma being passed down. And I know
Which is not just the persons of color too. It's also the
yeah.
non-people of color
Yeah.
that there's a sense of not being connected to the trauma, so they don't recognize when you're re-traumatizing a person through microaggressions, or when people who say that they're very liberal, they don't even know that they're also creating even more harm sometimes than the person that outrightly says something negative about your ethnicity or race.
Yeah.
So yeah.
For sure. So, the trauma is childhood trauma, especially. It rears its ugly head in adulthood in different ways. Like, like from my personal experiences. But I don't want to make it all doom and gloom, right? Like,
No, not at all.
You know what I mean? There are some things that you can do, and you can spot right away. Now, everybody's different, right? This is why it's important that one goes to therapy and continues on that exploration of understanding themselves and trying to make themselves better.
Absolutely.
But here are just a quick 5 things that you could kind of do, things you can do to push back on, some of these markers, these traumas that
Cope with it and manage it. Is
yeah, a little bit, or at least recognize it. So, one of the number one of the good things to do is to work on self-regulating your emotions, right? So sometimes, like I said, for that one of the personal examples was that if I go ask my boss, about something, I'm worried about being rejected, and that those feelings can kind of boil up and get big really fast in your mind and in your body. Your heart will race a little, you get a little sweaty, you'll lose kind of your focus. So at those moments is when you kind of like step back and try to self-regulate, whether it's through breathing techniques or whatever it is that you can do to kind of like self-regulate your emotions and bring yourself
manage the feelings.
Yeah,
bring
manage those
yourself down
sensations.
from a high stress level down to a more manageable, calmer place.
Yeah, you have to, so that's like a self-regulating, and that helps in a lot of things. And I've kind of been attempting to do that a lot more in my personal lives and my work life, and I catch myself sometimes I don't, you know what I mean? But it's all a work in progress, and that's what we try to do here on 6 Chain Therapy is, work on ourselves, right? So, this is another thing that people with trauma do, and this is a general statement, so this may not be you or me or whoever, but it's a kind of a clear marker. Try to find people who reciprocate romantic and friendship feelings. So, like in that case, it's like when for instance, if you're in a relationship, you tend to sometimes, find people with traits that from those traumas. You know what I mean?
There's a term for that too. One of the terms is trauma bonding. Where you like you said, you're not conscious of it, but you find out that person has a similar trauma than you, or you have the opposing trauma.
Right.
So you recognizing the other person, it becomes like an attractive thing. But then, when you get together and it plays out in the relationship, then you realize, oh, he's like this because his auntie left him on the door, out in the street.
Right.
And then, so it becomes this kind of like, this kind of very painful attachment to each other. And it really takes sometimes, couples therapy or finding other ways to feel safe around that other person.
Right. And all those things, self-regulating, making sure you're sharing with people who reciprocate, whether it be friends or romantic relationships. Those are important. But also, number 3 is get good at ending relationships, right? Because it's important that if something isn't working out, whether it be a friendship or a close work friendship, as long as it doesn't impede on you doing your job, it's a healthy thing to end relationships. You know what I mean? And kind of move on, especially if they're not working towards you getting better or being better or your well-being. 4, and this is like an old saying, I think all our mothers have said this before, show me your friends and I'll show you who you are. You know what I mean? So this is number 4 is a classic case of that. Choose friends who are working on themselves, right? So them working on themselves, meaning like always choose friends who are always striving to be better, no matter what it is. Okay, these are just general statements.
But also, if I could just add to that, right? So sometimes we don't have friends that are doing better, right? I'm trying to, be self-aware.
Right.
So support groups, it's really important that you look for a support group that speaks to the trauma that you might have experienced. So you can do that in individual therapy, group therapy, sometimes both at the same time.
Yeah. Number 5 and the final one is activities that bring you growth. Right? Like anything that can bring you growth. And this can be going to church. This can be going to the gym. Can be so many things that, that can help you grow, right? And grow away from your trauma. So activities that bring you growth. So that's it. Those are the 5. But there are plenty others. And everybody's trauma is unique and different, and has its own set of laws and rules. Right,
because what's traumatic to you may not be traumatic to me.
Right.
And vice versa.
Because he's scared of roller coasters and I'm not.
I'm not scared of roller coasters, you are. I'm not afraid of roller coasters. Who told you that?
You told me that.
I didn't tell you that I was afraid of roller coasters. There's a roller coaster park in Ohio that I plan to go to. All the rides are all roller coasters. All of them.
All right, I'm sorry.
Hey, listen. He just traumatized me right there. Like, oh my God, what? So the other thing about trauma too, there's not all doom and gloom about trauma. Trauma can also create strength, meaning you can realize that you're resilient and going through something. Like, I made it through. I spoke to this person. I contacted the police, or I talked to friends about it, and I came to the other side. So that it makes you feel like you can actually get through difficult things. Another positive is empathy. Sometimes going through a trauma, you become more empathetic to people who went through a similar thing. I remember during the pandemic, one of my friends didn't believe in depression. Like he felt like people who said that depression is just weakness and all that, till they got depressed during the pandemic, and they were like, oh, that's what it is.
Sometimes you gotta go through it to understand.
That was really, really, really deep. So, so there's upsides to it. It can be a form of strength as you get through and work it through. So it's not always like a negative thing, but you do have to be aware of when it's playing out in your life, which you did a great job.
No.
Explaining.
All right, so I think we tidied it up.
I think we did.
You know what I mean? So thank you for listening to 6 String Therapy. I'm DJ Mayday.
And I'm Professor S, your psychotherapist to the stars. Even though I look scruffy and I've got a hoodie, I'm a psychotherapist in real life.
Don't forget.
If I open this, it'll say, instead of S for Superman, it'll say psychotherapist.
No, it will definitely will not.
Oh.
I want you to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.
Peace.
All right.
What do you think?
I thought it was good.
Do you think so?
I think you kind of fumbled the ball a little bit over there, but you made up for it.
Which one did I fumble?
Because
I fumbled all the way through this.
Anytime you break the fourth wall.
Oh, would I talk to them?
When you break the fourth wall, you stop facing the camera. You stop talking about the thing. You're like, oh, we're gonna have to edit this. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wall. Like that. I think that.
Oh, but that's when I feel like it's not. When I do that, I feel like it's not relevant.
No,
Whatever I say is not relevant.
But I think it's.
But I'm just making I'm making. What the hell was that? Oh,
I dropped
it's just my way of just acknowledging I fumbled, and to edit it out. That's all I'm really doing. It's like in the moment because I know you can.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, but
But you're saying I don't have to do that. Is what you're saying? But
yeah, I'm saying you could just roll through it.
Yeah.
And if it looks bad, I've never. Do you feel like I ever try to make you look bad?
Try to make me look bad. Why would you? No.
I'm just saying, like, do you feel like that in the editing or something that I did something? So then
I will trust you. So in other words, trust the process.
Right, trust me. I wouldn't.
I never trust you.
You're the
I just started trusting you like 2 days ago.
That's fucked up.
No, listen, at least it's 2 days ago. It's not like a zero.